Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Our guest today is Zintle Koza, a visiting fellow from South Africa to the Wilson Center's Africa program. She's going to join us today to talk about South Africa's recent elections, and also we'll take a look at the health of the relatively young new democracy at 25 years. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so
Pleasure
much.
to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So a little less than a month ago, we had elections, and I saw some pieces that you were quoted in saying victory for the African National Congress was not the doubt, right? That was not the drama. But were there any surprises?
Maybe let's say two surprises. I think the first one really was the low voter turnout. A surprise in a bad way. And the issue with that as well is that the young people, is the age demographic between 18 and 24, they are the ones who did not go and vote the most. Now, for a young democracy, because that demographic is the future, that is worrying. So that was the first surprise. And I think the second one, it was a surprise for them, I think the economic freedom fighters, that they didn't get as much as they thought they would. Their projections were, 15, 16%. And because of they are so visible on social media, and there were expectations that they would really reach those marks, from them at least, and they didn't. So that says a lot in terms of, I think, moving forward, how the pollings are done by parties and also your think tanks and them, and how realistic that when you take into account the role of social media. So I see that as another strand of research that will be very interesting to look into.
I wrote down the numbers because I think you brought up the point. Let's look at it. It was 65.99% turnout this time around. And I have to say, in the United States, that would be considered high turnout in many elections.
Yeah.
But that's down from 73.48% in 2014 and 77.3% in 2009. Is it, you saw a similar arc after the fall of the Soviet Union, where there was a tempering of enthusiasm about democracy, and it was tied to expectations. Is that what's happening in South Africa as well?
I would agree, John. I think the surprise for us, we started on such a high. I think in a lot of ways,
Nelson
South Africa,
Mandela.
we really started on such a high, right? And I think now, as we are easing into the how democracies evolve, some of those things are coming through. So definitely it's an issue of high expectations. Going back to the young people not coming out to vote, it's down to them being unemployed, them not being able to afford education. We had a huge fees must fall movement 3-4 years back, and we are still having some of those challenges. So a lot of it really has to do with young people saying, but since 94, I am here, and the benefits where I am
done for me.
Exactly. And now the challenge now moving forward is to actually engage those young people to say, it is a day-to-day work. We have to get in it, and more importantly, we hear you. Your voices are being heard. That's the work that we need to do.
Those sort of aspirational messages can fall flat when you don't have a job, and you're struggling economically. And South Africa suffers from some of the worst inequality on the planet.
Yes.
Is there a plan there? Is there a way to address, and you mentioned young people, also women, and black-skinned people are the worst sufferers under this inequality. Is there a plan?
There is a plan. I think the challenge is twofold. The first has been a challenge of leadership. And it's something that the governing ANC has also admitted, that for the past 9 years, especially under the previous administration, unfortunately, there was a lack of leadership. And as a result, currently we even have the Zondo Commission still sitting, looking at issues of state capture and the extent of the damage that has been done in terms of governance, in terms of state-owned entities, right through the systems and processes of government I think it's only now coming out. And a large part of that is really the leadership. We lost almost a decade, to be quite frank. And it's something that President Ramaphosa, incoming president, has been, even when he was campaigning for the party leadership, he campaigned on that platform that he would address the corruption, and he would address all the consequences of the corruption, such as the high unemployment. So since then, it's been very much on a economy. One of the top 5 priorities is State of the Nation address this year. From last year, even huge investment conferences, the first one that was held, to try and entice investors back to say, South Africa, we're now in charge, we're going to clean up government, we're going to clean up the SOEs, and you can come and invest in South Africa. Partner.
Is the history of corruption the biggest barrier to business growth?
It's not really. The other issue is structural. These are structural issues. And I know a lot of people would say it's been a quarter of a century. I think for people who have not really, lived and been in the South African context, it's very much easy to say it's 25 years, you should have by now. For example, the issue of the apartheid state, how it maintained itself was largely through use of cheap black labor, in your mining, in your manufacturing.
An exploitation model.
Exactly. So now you come 1994, and you have a historical structure that says that if you are a black South African, you can only get educated up to a certain level in certain things and all of that. So there is that huge backlog that still has to be addressed.
This notion that 25 years is a long time. But apartheid's wounds are not healed.
Exactly.
Colonialism
and apartheid.
And colonialism
that's the double whammy, exactly, that South Africa experienced.
So is there, President Ramaphosa, is there a vision that addresses this, that says, listen, we have these entrenched problems that date back many, many, many decades that have to be addressed before we can really robustly move into the future? Is there a sense of that?
John, it's for the first time in almost a decade, I was home over the December break. I felt that sense of renewed hope.
More urgency?
I know it might, cynics will say, it's the campaigning. But I felt that sense of, because now we have a president who seems to be taking the job seriously. Because a huge problem with the previous president was, it didn't feel like you're not taking things seriously. And just, I think the urgency of it, convening investment conferences, and, being present and being clear also in terms of the State of the Nation address that shared inclusive growth is an issue. We need to tackle education. That's one of our most fundamental challenges. How to transform and ensure that South African kids who are going to public schools get the best possible quality education. How to transform industry. The South African business model was such that the pre-1994, that the economy was literally run by 5 or 6 big conglomerates, and monopolies then were entrenched. And just recently, the president signed the competition bill that's trying to, facilitate that you can get more businesses entering the market because of the entrenched monopolies, that it is almost impossible because the barriers to entering are so high because of the monopolies. So that are some of the structural challenges that from 1994, they were not addressed as urgently as they should have. Granted, of course, you say that the bigger, the other argument to that is that the bigger overall, what Mandela and them were focused on was that we don't descend into a civil war. So priorities as well. So there were so many other things. And that's why the focus now is here, a lot of this in South Africa, that fine, we have the political freedom. We don't need passes now. You can live in Pretoria, you can live, we have, our constitution is so aspirational. I've been here in the US the past months, and some of the issues that are still being debated, your issues of women's reproductive rights. I'm like, South Africa, thank you. It's so aspirational that, all of those issues we secured. The issue now is bread and butter.
And it's never finished, right? There's always ebb and flow. You can't get complacent.
Exactly.
When you talk about leadership and President Ramaphosa, as you seem to think that he might have the right stuff to be the leader you're looking for. But, they always say leaders need followers too. And you talk about the disengagement of young people.
Yes.
How do you re-engage people and build some momentum?
John, for me, I think it's being authentic. being authentic. Leaders like President Mandela, they made it look easy. How is, he got, well, when you read the history and you look at go to YouTube and you look at, we're in such tense situations for so many times before the elections and even after the elections. But because I think we felt that authenticity, that he's walking the walk.
Well, there's that classic question, does history make the person or the person make history?
Exactly.
And Nelson Mandela was such a unique figure with a unique story. It's hard to be that.
But I think from the lessons, that's the other, that's giving people comfort at home. I think that President Ramaphosa, he learned from him. He worked very closely with President Mandela. During the negotiations, he was the main negotiation official on behalf of the ANC. So if you were to talk to someone who, and before then, he was, in the trade unions, he was a negotiator with the National Union of Mine Workers. So you have someone here who didn't just, drop in, or they just came after 1994 and suddenly they want to lead. He was there in the trenches. So you have someone who, and then he went to business and became a, so he has both sides, right? He used to be in the mines now. And I think the other issue is that in terms of the ANC itself, arguably he is the best possible person amongst the current crop of leaders that they could present, that the people felt comfortable with.
Beyond the ANC, are there leaders among the loyal opposition that could be helpful in looking towards South Africa's future?
John, our opposition is possibly, and I want to phrase this, how should I phrase this? I think, South African politics got so polarized over the 9 years because of the public fighting around the corruption and sort of the lack of leadership. And it got so you had an opposition that really, was trying almost every parliamentary session to have, no votes of confidence passed against the president. So it was a very contentious,
That will not sound unfamiliar to America.
I know. So it was very, very, and I think they got used to that type of engagement of being very antagonistic, and they had the ammunition as well because of everything that the former was doing. Now you have a president, I was watching his acceptance when he was elected in parliament, that in comparison, even the tone of the parliament has sort of changed because of how President Ramaphosa is engaging with the opposition. He ensures, he takes notes and he addresses each and every one of the opposition members to say, thank you for your comment, I think on this, on this, on this. So I think because of that, how he is coming across and how he's engaging them, opposition is now willing to come on board and assist.
That's a very hopeful thought.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you can't rebuild those relationships overnight.
No. But I think his approach and what is interesting, what is going to be interesting moving forward is now how the opposition tries to, strategize, because now he's charming all of them, and that's not good for their voters, because now voters are going to say, but he seems very...
It'd be easier to be opposition if he was yelling at them when he's
and not being
competent,
them. But now he's charming them, and he's wearing the Madiba shirts, and he's, just talking to the economy, he's saying all the right things, and he's saying, great idea, if you have a proposal, that's what he's saying, please come and present us and we can talk about it. And John, he even appointed an opposition leader to the cabinet, something that only Madiba used to do.
A clear olive branch.
Exactly.
Yeah. Zintle, I know you have experience with the EU, that you spent some time as a representative.
Yes.
When you look at the sort of populist wave that has been spreading around the world, and we just had some mixed results in that regard in the recent EU election, how did the politics in South Africa, do a comparison and contrast for us? Is it a similar wave, or is it a very different circumstance?
I think because of the history, you see one of the surprising, at least to many South Africans, that happened with the recent elections is the Freedom Front Plus actually grew votes, and they are positioning themselves as speaking for the Africans' white minority. For a long while they were seeking separate states from the apartheid. So You get that, and before the election,
Are they South Africa's version of the far right?
yes, they are. And before the elections, you had their lobbying group, they're called AfriForum, also touring the US. I don't know if you saw that incident. Then it was on Fox News, and then President Trump tweeted about that, white South Africans were being killed
Yes.
for the land. So all of that definitely is finding its way into South Africa. But I also think because social media, it's quite clear now that the populist movements are really making use of social media. They are linking up and they are making these networks and assisting each other and funding.
You saw
each
that
other.
evidence of the shooting in New Zealand.
Exactly, in Christchurch. So definitely, but then in the South African context, I mean, I would like to believe that the majority of South Africans, including white South Africans, do not want to get to a state where things are racialized as they were under apartheid, because that works for no one. But at the same time, you have this very vocal constituency, yes, because they are a constituency. And I think that, and you've made the point, we have yet to heal from the apartheid wounds. So you have such a constituency, it's going to need leadership. It's definitely going to leadership from President Ramaphosa, and I think just the broad society as well, just to ensure that, because we clearly still have so much conversations that we need to have as a country, and just that it's not that it's managed, but we need to have leadership to ensure that, things don't ferment and we literally regress to where we were before 1994.
I have a final question for you, Zintle, is about where that leadership should focus its efforts. What are the short-term priorities? What needs to be addressed most immediately?
Most immediately, John, is unemployment. It's unemployment. Our statisticians in general, I mean, the first quarter of this year alone, we are at 27% of unemployment.
And you're losing jobs. You're not at this current moment.
Exactly.
Right.
We are losing jobs. It's the unemployment, because tied to that unemployment is what we discussed before. Then it will be, apathy and marginalization and being disconnected from the nation and from the republic, and from there will fall all these other things. And the key with that is inequality is falling. We are, according the World Bank, we are now literally the most unequal country in the world. That is unsustainable. So we have to address the unemployment. And by addressing unemployment, we have to look at how we are skilling our young people. And also how we need to reskill as well, because of the changes in the economy. So many abled men. So you have thousands of men who are losing jobs from mines, for example. Right? Because some mines have reached capacity in terms of sourcing the minerals. Mines are adapting and getting more mechanized as well. So you're getting people laid off from the big mines. 40 years old, 45 years old, 30 years old. We have to have a plan what to do, because those are, fathers. We
it's
need
not retirement age.
Definitely not retirement age. So we have to focus on the unemployment and reskilling of those who lose their jobs, so that that's where we need to focus on.
Well, thank you for this terrific briefing, and it's great to have you here, even if it's for a short time.
Yes,
Zintle
I'll
Koza.
be back. Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks to you for those of you who joined us today as well. Hope you enjoyed our discussion, and that you'll join us again for a future edition of Wilson Center. Now, until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for joining us.